What's going on, world? Zaire Inc. Afroon Bomb in the back. We back in it. Day 2, writing session. We about to record some hits today. I'm excited about what we did yesterday. So first and foremost, gotta set the mood, right? Gotta do that. Gotta do that.
Must be.
Let's jump into it.
I had to ask myself, do I want to take this road? Some days you'll cry for help when it's you and no one else. Don't forget the prophecy, you'll be rapping globally. Sentences to set the people free, just keep the faith and surely
I walked into the event, sat at a corner, and Zaire was one of the performers for that night.
Especially early on, I was a very introverted person, you know, so I would go to open mics, perform, immediately leave the stage, I'm gone, you know?
And if you've met Zaire, you can tell there's something special about him. He got onto the stage and looked at the crowd, and he just controlled the crowd with his presence without even saying a word. There was something special about him, and I didn't even think we would end up working together. I just knew I had to tell him that I appreciated what he's doing.
So I just remember that initial encounter, but sometime later, I was performing at an event, and he was in attendance there. Right as I'm about to go perform, something, you know, hits me and like, yo, you should connect with him more. And right as I think that, he taps me on my shoulder and was like, yo, we should connect after this event. I'm like, man, I was just thinking the same thing.
Seasons change, people change, you the same. Seasons change, people change, you the same. So you're the only one I want. Yeah, keep it 100, go ahead, call me Will. Yeah, burning these bridges before they get built. Yeah, all of my life I've been living with guilt, fighting my demons with only a hill. How can I win? How can I win?
Hey. That's crazy.
Montreal is it's an interesting place because it's very multicultural, very metropolitan. So I think growing up, I was exposed to a lot of different kinds of people from various walks of life. And so it was interesting for me as a young person to have all these cultural influences. You know, there's like the jazz festival in Montreal, there's hip hop, there's blues, like all these different musical components. You know, I spent the first 16 years of my life there, and so it's really the bedrock and the foundation of who I am. I've been so heavily influenced by that city in ways that I'm still discovering now.
Was involved in a lot of a cappella groups with my boarding school years in Cameroon.
Want you to hold my hand, don't let me fall back. Growing up on my own, I need you like right now. Would you hold my hand? Would you hold my hand? Would you hold my hand? Mom, would you hold my hand?
Straight after that, spent a few years in university and then moved over here to Canada.
I come from a 2-parent household, and then a lot of my friends came from single-parent households, typically their mothers. They were, you know, exposed to whether it be like drugs or selling drugs, doing drugs, how they process things emotionally, how they tended to use like aggression in certain instances. So those were like pivotal moments that I started to unpack later on in like my teenage years.
The music I make, I try to hit a certain target, people who know what it feels like to feel pain, know what it is to have little and to be content with it.
There's like one teacher in particular who, when I had just gotten to middle school, she really took an interest in writing in general, but then also she saw like the potential that I had, really take an interest and go out of her way to provide me with like literature that she knew I would find interesting and engaging.
I had a cousin that I really looked up to called William. I was doing a cappella, as I mentioned earlier, with so many groups, and he pulled me aside once and asked him, have you ever considered writing your own music? Because up to that point, we were doing covers. I said no. So I took it up upon me as a challenge to write something. I did a demo, had a basic mix, and I had my siblings come into my room and do some backup vocals for me. Just had a bunch of kids just sit there and just sing whatever I told him to sing. And it's just so pure, so beautiful, listen to all those voices. So that really inspired me to want to get into production, that alone. I sent it off to William to listen to it. I didn't hear back from him for about 3 months. And one day after school, he called me and he just went off like, Tim, that was amazing. And just listening to that from someone that I really looked up to, it really encouraged me to want to pursue music.
I ended up hiring Tim in a post-secondary environment. And what was interesting is it wasn't just myself. He had a number of people who really wanted to see him succeed. And I think it's because Tim did such a brilliant job of creating connections and bridges during his time in school.
And we had a group project where we could form words about the environment. And so each group could decide what the project would be on. And our group wrote some lyrics and I put some melody to it. So I had the group perform that in class. That was my first performance ever here in Canada.
I think it speaks to this idea of creating a village of supporters who want to see you succeed.
I had to learn how to fend for myself, look for work, build a community. It was tough, but I think I needed that move because up till that moment, I was completely dependent on family and parents back home. So this was very formative for me to the man that I'm becoming. I grew up the only kid for 10 years of my life before my sisters came in. And not just one, but I have twin sisters. Subconsciously, I think even as a kid, you don't realize these things, but it's like you feel like the attention has been taken away from you somehow. Even though that's not the case, like your parents love you dearly, you can tell they love you, they provide all your needs, but somehow you feel like there's something missing. Unfortunately, sometimes you end up meeting the wrong groups who, with peer pressure being so young in those formative years, you get into trouble. I've also been fortunate and blessed that God has always looked after me in a special way that when I find myself getting into those, something happens and it's like, no, you're not supposed to be here. My dad traveled a lot. He worked a lot to take care of all of us. And that's something I never really understood. I knew I had him, but he wasn't always that close. So manhood was Zaire and I coming together to write a story.
I was sharing with him about my parents' separation and the effect that had on me. I was telling him, man, what does it mean to be a man? Like the standards are always changing from decade to decade. You know, there's new rules coming in, old ones leaving. Like I just can't keep up. And he was sharing similar stories, like in relation to challenges he had with his father, difficulties he was having in the culture. And then we just said, yo, I think we're connected on this same idea. Why don't we start to kind of process this together?
I think I'm losing it. I think I'm losing it. I can't explain, I'm in too deep. Maybe it's in my head. And all the people that I look up to, they just don't care. And life's not fair. And life ain't fair.
It's a very personal tone, you know, and it speaks to things that create a space of vulnerability. You know, what else could be more personal than what happens in our families, right? We grow up thinking, don't share your dirty laundry, don't talk about this, don't talk about that, because what happens in that space of our families is both so precious and potentially so traumatic.
So far I've been finding it kind of hard to don my manhood. As the hero of history has lived long enough to see himself become the villain. Now maybe it's just a feeling, but I fear I'll be hung from a money tree, trying to please a bunch of ladies that no longer believe manhoods are made of marriage material. So can I tell you, my deepest concerns with all due respect, I've seen the daughters of Eve being baptized in lukewarm water, while the sons of Adam stand.
So now we're in a very better place as adults, me and my dad. But that's where I was at the time when I was writing that. So that's the beautiful thing as well, I think, about music is over time things change. But Zara and I, 10 years down the line, we'll look back and know exactly what was going on because it's in the music every step of the way.
Want to invite you. Catch a vibe with us.
So everything just kind of came to a head one night. I got into a fight with my brother who had recently, at the time, moved out here. And me and him growing up, we had always had conflict and just unresolved kind of anger. And around the same time, my parents were getting separated. And so there was a lot of things that were just building up to that moment when me and him got into a fight. We got into an argument. He was driving a car, and I was just like, man, pull over, you know? And he was like, nah, I'm not gonna pull over. So I just, in a split second, decided to jump out the car.
Truly, I tell you, I nearly did die. I built the whip in the dead of night. Demons was laughing, but now they keep a distance. Yeah, called it to him and he came. Yeah, that's divine assistance. Yeah.
At that moment that I, literally but figuratively hit rock bottom, it was really a moment where I needed to figure out, like, what are you doing? What do you want for your life? Are you trying to commit suicide? And so that was like things that I had to wrestle with after choosing to jump out of that car.
Yeah, I see the summit from the thick of the thicket where they worship the wicked, and it's hard to be different. Damn, truth be told, this life is all I have. But as I hear your heart, I'm really torn in half.
Fortunately, there was just like some scrapes and bruises, but a lot worse could have occurred. Even relationally, like me and my brother could have never repaired our relationship. I could have stayed angry with my parents, like a lot of different things. As tough as it was, like a learning experience, I'm thankful for the way it pushed me into my faith, back into my faith, to develop a relationship with Jesus again that I hadn't had since I was a young child. I really just started to restructure my life at that point. I started to look for new friends. I started to change the messages I was listening to, the things I was putting out. And I think all of that played a role into like the evolution of who I am as a person today.
So you're the one, yeah, you're the only one I need. On my mind like 24/7.
Writing has allowed me to break out of, I think, a lot of patterns of thinking. It's allowed me to just have fun. I think as a kid, my parents would always tell me, I don't really remember, but like, you had the biggest laugh, you laugh like an old man. I think I lost that in my teenage years. And it was through writing that I was like, when I get a cool line, I'm like, phew, I rush downstairs, whoever's there, like, I got this, it's nice, right? Like, I just have a lot of fun doing art.
I stuttered as a kid for a long time. And so someone told me once that music really helps with that. And as soon as I got into it and I found out that it was working, I knew there was no way to get out of it.
And so I remember when I was 9 years old, I had braids at the time. I wore braids. I had braids for a number of years. And I would wear a do-rag, like a head covering to protect your braids, specifically if you're like active or sleeping, just to maintain it. So whenever I would go outside during recess, I'd wear my do-rag. But I remember one day the principal actually called me into her office and asked me if I was in a gang. And I'm 9 years old. And she was convinced that I'm in a gang. And she's like, so are you? And I wore my do-rag, it was like white and red. And I think maybe because it was like the Bloods and the Crips, and maybe she was thinking that, I don't know what, but where I lived in the suburbs of Montreal, there was no gang activity. And there was no 9-year-olds in gangs. And so she was just convinced that I was in a gang. I'm crying, and she's giving me a Kleenex box, but still accusing me of being in a gang. And so I was just shook up by that experience. And I didn't think of it as racism at the time. Of course, like I'm 9 years old, I'm not thinking of that. But when I moved here, I was around 16 and I started to, again, read Malcolm X, Tupac, and Martin Luther King, and I started to get into like the civil rights era and Black Panthers, and I was like, wait a minute, that was racist. That was blatant racism that she would accuse a 9-year-old kid of being in a gang.
I see hate crimes. They say I'm colorblind, but I'm staring through your very eyes. Why did mama die? Cause now I'm just a little kid, stuck with hate and fear in my heart.
What I experience now is just people being ignorant about Black culture because it's not taught in schools. If I talk about, human zoos, that's probably a surprise to people. If I talk about the contemporary things, if I talk about like Jim Crow laws, like that's probably news to people who are not exposed to that in an educational environment. And so I think a lot of things are just people being confused. And it's on us, I think the burden in a large sense, as Black people is to like be gracious enough to explain what we've been through, why we're still impacted by it, and how challenging it is on a day-to-day basis.
If you think about our mission statement for Tour Creatives, which is making the world we live in the one we envision, we felt like, there's a group of people who are in need of great messages out there and understand the power of words.
Cried up for help when he sent in the sun. What do you know? I'm straight from the bottom with nothing except what you got in your pocket. People around you are waiting to profit. No one will step in to stop it. Yeah.
Especially in the hip-hop world, there's a lot of glorification of gang culture, of drug culture, of taking advantage of women, just things that we weren't really in line with and that weren't true to our characters.
Sometimes you're listening and it's not edifying.
Zaire and Tim are able to bridge these audiences without feeling like they're ostracizing anyone at the same time.
And we wanted to push the fold of what it means to have like faith-based music in contemporary culture in a manner that's engaging, that's uplifting, that taps into the sounds of the culture, but does it in such a way that they're being uplifted in the same time, almost as though they're not aware of it, because it's so similar to what people are used to.
We felt like we would be doing a disservice to our community and to ourselves if we weren't staying true to telling our stories while encouraging other people to live up to their fullest potential through the music that we make.
We're trying to impact youth. We're trying to, bring people back together, whether it be relationships or community. Like we just really want to create a space where everyone's in it together, everyone's feeling invested and involved in that vision.
Down the line, it would be fun to have different people, different talents coming in, and part of it is, hey, you're coming in, you have to mentor someone else behind you. So be willing, be open to the idea of mentoring someone else, essentially. At the core, we really care about that one-on-one mentorship with you.
I've done like prison ministry where I've talked to, young men and even older men who are awaiting sentencing, and a lot of them have kids. And so I just started to think about, what is happening to these kids if their father is in prison right now? Like, who's looking after them? Who's mentoring them? So spending time in that environment, but also like doing spoken word workshops with young people and seeing them come out of their shell, them sharing things that they wouldn't have otherwise shared if it wasn't for that medium. It's really about engaging people who don't have a family, who don't have the social and the economic backing, and they don't come from an environment that supports that growth. For me to not just be an ongoing voice, but to like be a spark of them wanting a better life for themselves.
I say, wait, stars don't stand for a spot in my universe, wait. Birds don't soar, but I feed them anyway, wait. You've been on a journey by yourself, now it's time to catch your break. Just have faith.
And, I remember Tim talking about how, the song was also reflective of a time in his life when he was working, he realized he just needed to wait. He needed to kind of put this in the space of the universe and kind of say, you know what, I don't have control anymore.
Why would you do me like this? Why would you do me like this? Why would you tell them you love me but keep doing things that will hurt hurt you, what happened to us?
And how much do we just need to wait? And I think it hit home for a lot of people, especially right now.
Zai has really been very instrumental in ensuring that I continue to make the music, because I see his drive. I see that it's not just about me anymore. This is someone who's also as passionate, and so we have to keep working to it.
But it's just been amazing to see it go beyond just, you know, the basement of creating music to going out into the world and going into the eyes and ears of people who we weren't even necessarily writing for at the time.